I had been on the road for hours, the long stretch of highway seeming to never end. I had been a trucker for years, driving alone through the endless expanse of open roads. But tonight, something felt off. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a sense of unease had been creeping up on me since I started my journey. The silence of night was only broken by the rumbling of my truck's engine and the occasional howling of the wind. The darkness seemed to shallow everything in its path, making the road seemed never-ending. Just as I was about to shrug off my uneasiness and continue on, my truck suddenly started to sputter and slow down. I cursed, pulling over to the side of the road. I got out and checked the engine, but everything seemed to be in working order. With a frustrated sigh, I climbed back into the driver's seat and turned the key, hoping that the problem had fixed itself. But as soon as I started the engine, I noticed a figure standing in the distance, just at the edge of the darkness. My heart started to race as I squinted, trying to make out of what or who it could be. I had driven on these roads countless times, and I had never seen anyone out here in the dead of night. Fear started to take the hold of me as a chill ran down my spine. I quickly turned off the engine and sat in silence, my eyes never leaving the figure in the distance. But to my horror, the figure started to move towards me. Without hesitation, I jumped out of the truck and ran towards the back, grabbing a tire iron for protection. The figure was getting closer and my heart was pounding in my chest. I could see now that it was a person, their features hidden in the shadows. "Who are you and what do you want?" I yelled, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure stopped in the tracks, only a few feet away from me. They remained silent, almost as if they were studying me. The air around us was thick with tension and fear. I could feel my heart racing as I stood there, the tire iron shaking in my grip. After what it felt like an eternity, the figure finally spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped." The voice was deep and raspy, sending shivers down my spine. I was about to ask them what they meant when suddenly the unknown person lunged at me. I swung the tire iron in self-defense and managed to hit him in the arm. They stumbled back and quickly recovered, throwing themselves at me once again. We grappled in the darkness, my adrenaline pumping as I tried to fight off the stranger who seemed to have been attacking me for no reason. But just as I was about to get the upper hand, I felt a sharp pain under my side and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a dark room, my hands and feet bound with rope. A panic set as I was looking around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The room was dimly lit, with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Just as I was about to try to break free from my restraints, the door creaked open, revealing the figure from the highway. But now, they were clad in a long cloak, their face hidden in the shadows. "Do you know why you're here?" Their voice echoed through the room. I shook my head, my heart racing. "You stopped on the wrong stretch of the highway at the wrong time. You see, this is my territory, and I don't take kindly to trespassers." The figure spoke with an unnerving calmness. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This person, this stranger, had attacked me and kidnapped me for simply stopping on the side of the road. As if sensing my thoughts, they continued. "You see, I've been waiting for someone like you, someone who's foolish enough to stop and enter my domain." I struggled against my restraints, but they were tight and showed no signs of giving. The figure watched with amusement, almost if they were enjoying my torment. "I feed on fear, you see, and you're going to be my next meal," they revealed with a sinister smile. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of this nightmare. How had I ended up in this situation? How was I going to get out of it? But as the figure came closer, ready to feed on my terror, I remembered something my late grandmother had told me when I was a child. She had always warned me to never trust strangers, but especially those who seemed to thrive on causing harm and fear. With all the strength I could muster, I let out a battle cry and lunged at the figure. Surprised by my sudden attack, they stumbled back, and I used the opportunity to break free from my restraints and run towards the door. I didn't look back as I ran through the darkness, my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, I saw the exit and burst out into the night air, grasping for air. I did not stop running until I was back in my truck, and even then, I drove as fast as I could away from the stretch of the highway. Years later, I still think about the night and wonder who or what the figure was, and if they were still out there, waiting for their next victim. I never stop on the side of the road now, always reminding myself of the horrors that could be lurking in the darkness. Because sometimes, the scariest things are not the things we can see, but the things that hide in the shadows. I've been a trucker for long as I can remember, driving long distances on the open road with nothing but the soft hum of my engine to keep me company has always been my idea of freedom. But little did I know that one fateful night would change everything. It was a dark and stormy night, with a heavy rain pounding on my windshield as I drove through a deserted stretch of the highway. I had just made a delivery and was heading back home when I noticed a figure on the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched and shivering in the pouring rain. Without a second thought, I stopped my truck and opened the door, inviting her in. She climbed into the passenger seat, her clothes clinging to her body as she let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice shaky. "I have been walking for hours and I had no idea where I am." I nodded and offered her a blanket to warm up, as she wrapped it around her. I couldn't help but notice how pale and haggard she looked. Her hair tangled and her eyes were bloodshot, but I brushed it off, thinking she must have been through a rough time. As we continued driving, she told me that she was running away from an abusive relationship and was trying to get her as far away as possible. I felt a pang of sympathy for her and offered to drive her to the nearest truck stop where she could get some rest. But as we drove, she suddenly went quiet. I turned to check on her, and that's when I noticed her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were no longer bloodshot, but black and lifeless. Her face was controlled with a twisted grin, revealing sharp teeth. I slammed on the brakes and my heart racing in panic. "What the hell?" I shouted, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. The woman cackled, her voice now deep and menacing. "You should have not stopped, Tucker. Now you belong to me." I tried to open the door and run, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped in my own truck with this demon. She lunged at me, her claws digging into my skin as she whispered in my ear, "You will be my pawn, my vessel, and together we'll drive for all eternity." In a desperate attempt to escape, I reached out to my pocket knife and sliced her arm. To my horror, the black tar-like liquid oozed instead of blood. But it was enough to startle her, and I managed to push her off me and run out the truck. The rain had slowed down, but the wind was howling as I ran into the darkness. As I looked back, I saw the demon emerge from the truck, her body contorting and morphing into a human form. It let out a spine-chilling roar and began to chase after me. I ran for my life, my heart pounding in my chest as I could feel her breath on my neck. Every step I took felt like I was running in slow motion, the demon gaming on me with every stride. But then I saw the lights in the distance. The truck stopped. With all of my strength, I sprint towards it with my lungs burning and my legs feel like lead. As I reached the safety of the lit area, I could feel the demon's grasp slip away. I collapsed on the ground, catching my breath and thanking whatever forces of nature had saved me. After that night, I quit my job and swore to never drive on that stretch of the highway again. But the memory of the demon still haunts me. It was as if she had marked me as her target, and I could feel her presence everywhere I went. I started to see her in my nightmares, looking around the corners and whispering my name. I would wake up in cold sweats, my heart racing and my body trembling. My once peaceful life had turned into a never-ending nightmare. I tried to seek help, but no one believed my story. They all thought that I was hallucinating or making it up for attention. But I knew the truth. That demon had chosen me and wasn't going to stop until she claimed my soul. And then, one night, she came for me. I was standing outside my house, lost in the thought when I saw her emerge from the shadows. She was just as terrifying as I remembered, her eyes fixed on me as she approached. "You belong to me, Taka. It's time to fulfill our eternal contract," she hissed, reaching out to grab me. But then, something miraculous happened. A bold strike of lightning struck her, causing her body to disintegrate into ash. The storm intensified, as if celebrating her demise. I was in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. But then, I saw a figure standing in the distance. A woman with piercing blue eyes, surrounded by a bright golden aura. She walked towards me and put a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft yet commanding. "Your soul was marked by a powerful demon, but she underestimated the strength of your will. You have survived and broken her hold on you. Your soul was marked by a powerful demon, but she underestimated the strength of your will. You have survived and broken her hold on you. You are free now." And with that, she disappeared, leaving me in awe with a newfound sense of peace. I never saw the demon again. I would finally live my life without fear. But I will never forget that night. The night I encountered pure evil and managed to get out alive. And to this day, I wonder if that woman who saved me was just a passaway or just something more powerful, watching and protecting us from the darkness. I never thought my job as a trucker would lead me to this horror. Driving long hours on deserted highways always gave me a sense of adventure, but this one trip changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine drive from one state to another, but little did I know, I was about to encounter my worst nightmare. I was on my third day of the trip, exhausted and struggling to keep my eyes open as I drove through the dark, desolated roads. It was nearing midnight when I saw the figure on the side of the road. I squinted, trying to get a better look, and I realized it was a young girl. She looked no older than 13, with long dark hair and pale, haunting face. I felt a chill run down my spine, but my instincts as a trucker had kicked in, and I pulled over to offer her a ride. As she got into the cab, I asked her where she was headed. She gave me a blank stare and replied, "Anywhere that's far from here." I didn't want to pry, so I simply nodded and continued driving. But I stole glances at her in my rearview mirror. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about her. She seemed to be in a trance-like state, not responding to my small talk or even acknowledging my presence. As the miles passed by, I became more and more uncomfortable. I decided to break the silence and asked her name. She turned to me, her eyes piercing and cold, and said, "I have no name, but my friends call me the Wendigo." I tried to brush it off, thinking she was just trying to scare me, but her words left a lingering sense of unease in me. Suddenly, the temperature in the truck dropped drastically, and an eerie silence engulfed us. The only sound that could be heard was the thumping of my heart. I wanted to pull over and kick her out of the truck, but something held me back. It felt like I was under a spell, unable to resist her commands. The girl tilted her head and whispered, "Keep driving." I couldn't disobey her, so I continued driving in silence, though my thoughts were consumed by fear and confusion. The hours passed by, and I lost track of time. The girl's presence felt suffocating, and I could feel her cold stare burning into the back of my neck. As the first days of rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, the girl suddenly vanished, leaving a chill in the air. I let out a sigh of relief and pulled over at the nearest gas station to take a break. As I stepped out of the truck, I noticed a strange symbol carved into the side of the truck, one that I'd never seen before. I shook off the strange events of the night and continued my journey, eager to reach my destination and put this all behind me. But my relief was short-lived, as the girl appeared once again in my truck, her eyes now glowing a bright, unnatural blue. She spoke, her voice haunting and almost inhuman. "You have now entered my territory, mortal. Prepare to face your fate." My heart raced as I realized that I somehow stumbled into a supernatural world. The Wendigo was known as a cannibalistic spirit that inhabited the forest, preying on unsuspecting travelers. And now, it seemed, I was her next target. I tried to run, but my body refused to move. The girl laughed, her voice echoing through my mind. She took control of the truck and drove us deeper into the woods, away from any signs of civilization. The forest grew darker and more sinister with each passing mile, and I could feel the Wendigo's power growing stronger. I knew I had to figure out a way to escape, but with each passing moment, it seemed less and less likely. The Wendigo's icy grip over me was unbreakable, and I could feel her dragging me towards my inevitable doom. Just when I thought all was lost, I noticed a faint crack in the windshield of the truck. I remembered I always kept a bottle of holy water in my glove compartment, just in case I ever needed it. I reached for it and splashed onto the crack, praying they would work against the supernatural force. To my surprise, the windshield shattered and the Wendigo let out a blood-curdling scream. I took on my chance and jumped out of the truck, running as fast as I could into the dense forest. I could feel the Wendigo's claws tearing at me, but I refused to give up. I ran for what is like hours, with the Wendigo's chilling laughter following me. But eventually, I saw a clearing ahead, and I burst out of the forest, free from the Wendigo's grasp. I collapsed, panting and exhausting, as the sun shone down on me. It took me a few moments to realize that I was surrounded by a group of people, all with terrified expressions on their faces. They told me that they had been hunting the Wendigo for years and I just escaped from her clutches. It's just been a few weeks since that terrifying night, but I still have nightmares about the Wendigo. I quit my job as a trucker, too afraid to ever drive through those woods again. But every time I see a long-full haul truck on the road, I shudder, wondering if the Wendigo is still out there, waiting for her next victim. It was a dark and stormy night as I drove my big rig down the isolated highway. I'd been on the road for hours, but I knew I still had a long journey ahead of me. It was just me and my truck, surrounded by darkness and the sound of rain patting against the roof. As I drove, I began to feel uneasy. The road seemed endless, with no signs of civilization in sight. The only source of light was the headlights of my truck, illuminating the road ahead. But even the light seemed to be fading as the storm grew stronger. Despite the unsettling feeling that began to creep up on me, I continued to press on. I was a seasoned trucker, used to long drives and isolated roads, but tonight something felt different, like I was being watched. But as I was about to shrug off my paranoia, something felt caught in my eye in the distance. It was a figure standing at the side of the road, illuminated by the headlights. I slowed down, trying to make out who or what it was. As I got closer, my heart began to race. It was a man, but he had an eerie aura about him. His eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, and his face was twisted into a sinister smile. I quickly looked away, trying to convince myself that it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. As I glanced back in my review mirror, I saw the man standing in the middle of the road, staring right at me. I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding to a stop just inches away from the strange man. In a panic, I put the truck in reverse and flooring the gas pedal. But no matter how fast I went, the man kept pace with my truck, his gaze never leaving me. I was in a state of terror, my heart beating out of my chest. What was happening? Who was this man and why was he chasing me? I kept driving, desperately trying to outrun this terrifying figure. But no matter how fast I went, he always seemed to be right behind me. I couldn't shake him off, and as the storm raged on, I could hear his laughter echoing through the night. It was a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. As I approached a curve of the road, I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't keep driving like this. I needed to get help. With a surge of adrenaline, I swerved my truck off the road and into a ditch. The truck tipped over, and I quickly climbed out of the cab, my mind racing with fear and confusion. But the man didn't stop his pursuit. He was still coming for me, his laughter growing louder and more maniacal. I stumbled through the darkness, the rain pouring down on me, and eventually found myself in the front of an abandoned house. Desperate for shelter, I rushed inside and barricaded the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I thought for sure I was going to have a heart attack. But as I caught my breath, I realized the house was not as safe as I hoped. The walls were covered in the strange symbols, and there were bits of old bones and feathers scattered on the floor. It was clear that this was not just an abandoned house, it was a place of evil. And just as I made the realization, I heard the man's laughter outside the door. I was trapped inside the house with this terrifying figure, and there was no way out. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud on the roof, followed by a scratching sound. The man was now on the roof of the house, trying to break in. Frantically, I searched for a weapon, hoping to defend myself. But just as I found the old rusted knife, the roof caved in and the man came chasing through. He was not alone. Behind him were several other figures, just as eerie and twisted as this one. I was surrounded, completely outnumbered and outmatched. They circled me, the laughter filling the house. I could feel their cold hands grabbing at me, the sharp nails scratching in my skin. I knew I was going to die, and there was nothing I can do to stop it. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard a loud honking noise coming from outside. It was my truck's horn, blaring repeatedly. And then, as if by some miracle, the man and his companions disappeared into the thin air. I was left alone in the abandoned house, shaken and terrified. I quickly ran outside to my truck and managed to get it back to the road. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station, where I collapsed on the ground in exhaustion and relief. It wasn't until I was able to calm down and process what had happened that I realized the truth. The man and his companions were not human. There were some sort of dark and twisted spirits haunting that isolated highway, and that I unknowingly stumbled in their territory. From that night on, I refused to drive on that screech of the highway. I warned other truckers to avoid it as well, but few believed my story. I knew the truth. I had encountered a horror that was beyond a human comprehension, and it was a memory that would haunt me for the rest of my life.